Chapter 2. The First Appearance of the Man-Eaters. Unfortunately, this happy state of affairs did not continue for long, and our work was soon interrupted in a rude and startling manner. Two most voracious and insatiable man-eating lions appeared upon the scene, and for over 9 months waged intermittent warfare against the railway and all those connected with it in the vicinity of Tsavo. This culminated in a perfect reign of terror in December of 1898, when they actually succeeded in bringing the railway works to a complete standstill for about 3 weeks. At first, they were not always successful in their efforts to carry off a victim, but as time went on they stopped at nothing, and indeed braved any danger in order to obtain their favorite food. Their methods then became so uncanny, and their man-stalking so well-timed and so certain of success, that the workmen firmly believed they were not real animals at all, but devils in lions' shape. Many a time the coolies solemnly assured me that it was absolutely useless to attempt to shoot them. They were quite convinced that the angry spirits of 2 departed native chiefs had taken this form in order to protect against their railway being made through their country, and by stopping its progress to avenge the insult thus shown to them. I had only been a few days at Tsavo when I first heard that these brutes had been seen in the neighborhood. Shortly afterwards, 1 or 2 coolies mysteriously disappeared, and I was told that they had been carried off by night from their tents and devoured by lions. At the time I did not credit this story, and was more inclined to believe that the unfortunate men had been the victims of foul play at the hands of some of their comrades. They were, as it happened, very good workmen, and had each saved a fair number of rupees, so I thought it quite likely that some scoundrels from the gangs had murdered them for the sake of their money. This suspicion, however, was very soon dispelled. About 3 weeks after my arrival, I was roused one morning about daybreak, and told that one of my jemadars, a fine, powerful Sikh named Ungan Singh, had been seized in his tent during the night, and dragged off and eaten. Naturally, I lost no time in making an examination of the place, and was soon convinced the man had indeed been carried off by a lion, and its pug marks were plainly visible in the sand, while the furrows made by the heels of the victim showed the direction in which he had been dragged away. Moreover, the jemadar shared his tent with half a dozen other workmen, and one of his bedfellows had actually witnessed the occurrence. He graphically described how, at about midnight, the lion suddenly put its head in at the open tent door and seized Ungan Singh, who happened to be nearest the opening, by the throat. The unfortunate fellow cried out, "Choro!" let go, and threw his arms up around the lion's neck. The next moment he was gone, and his panic-stricken companions lay helpless, forced to listen to the terrible struggle which took place outside. Poor Ungan Singh must have died hard, but what chance had he? As a coolie gravely remarked, was he not fighting with a lion? On hearing this dreadful story, I at once set out to try to track the animal, and was accompanied by Captain Haslam, who happened to be staying at Tsavo at the time, and who, poor fellow, himself met with a tragic fate very shortly afterwards. We found it an easy matter to follow the route taken by the lion, as he appeared to have stopped several times before beginning his meal. Pools of blood marked these halting places, where he doubtless indulged in the man-eater's habit of licking the skin off so as to get at the fresh blood. I have been led to believe that this is their custom, from the appearance of 2 half-eaten bodies which I subsequently rescued. The skin was gone in places, and the flesh looked dry, as if it had been sucked. On reaching the spot where the body had been devoured, a dreadful spectacle presented itself. The ground all around was covered with blood and morsels of flesh and bones, but the unfortunate jemadar's head had been left intact, save for the holes made by the lion's tusks on seizing him, and lay a very short distance away from the other remains, the eyes staring wide open with a startled, horrified look in them. The place was considerably cut up, and on closer examination we found that 2 lions had been there, and had probably struggled for possession of the body. It was the most gruesome sight I had ever seen. We collected the remains as well as we could, and heaped stones on them, the head with its fixed, terrified stare, seeming to watch us all the time. For it we did not bury. We took it back to camp for identification before the medical officer. Thus occurred my first experience of man-eating lions, and I vowed there and then that I would spare no pains to rid the neighborhood of the brutes. I little knew the trouble that was in store for me, or how narrow were to be my own escapes from sharing poor Ungan Singh's fate. That same night I sat up in a tree close to the late jemadar's tent, hoping that the lions would return to it for another victim. I was followed to my perch by a few of the more terrified coolies, who begged to be allowed to sit up in the tree with me. All the other workmen remained in their tents, but no more doors were left open. I had with me my .303 and a 12-bore shotgun, one barrel loaded with ball and the other with slug. Shortly after settling down to my vigil, my hopes of bagging one of the brutes were raised by the sound of their ominous roaring coming closer and closer. Presently this ceased, and quiet reigned for an hour or two, as lions always stalk their prey in complete silence. All at once, however, we heard a great uproar and frenzied cries coming from another camp about half a mile away. We knew then that the lions had seized a victim there, and that we should see or hear nothing further of them that night. Next morning I found that one of the brutes had broken into a tent at Railhead Camp, whence we had heard the commotion during the night, and had made off with a poor wretch who was lying there asleep. After a night's rest, therefore, I took up my position in a suitable tree near this tent. I did not at all like the idea of walking the half-mile to the place after dark, but all the same I felt fairly safe, as one of my men carried a bright lamp close behind me. He in his turn was followed by another leading a goat, which I tied under my tree, in the hope that the lion might be tempted to seize it instead of a coolie. A steady drizzle commenced shortly after I had settled down to my night of watching, and I was soon thoroughly chilled and wet. I stuck to my uncomfortable post, however, hoping to get a shot, but I well remember the feeling of impotent disappointment I experienced when about midnight I heard screams and cries and a heart-rending shriek, which told me that the man-eaters had again eluded me and had claimed another victim elsewhere. At this time the various camps for the workmen were very scattered, so that the lions had a range of some 8 miles on either side of Tsavo to work upon, and as their tactics seemed to be to break into a different camp each night, it was most difficult to forestall them. They almost appeared to have an extraordinary and uncanny faculty of finding out our plans beforehand, so that no matter in how likely or how tempting a spot we lay in wait for them, they invariably avoided that particular place, and seized their victim for the night from some other camp. Hunting them by day, moreover, in such dense wilderness as surrounding us, was an exceedingly tiring and really foolhardy undertaking. In a thick jungle of the kind around Tsavo, the hunted animal has every chance against the hunter, as however careful the latter may be, a dead twig, or something of that sort, is sure to crackle just at the critical moment, and so give the alarm. Still I never gave up hope of some day finding their lair, and accordingly continued to devote all my spare time to crawling about through the undergrowth. Many a time, when attempting to force my way through this bewildering tangle, I had to be released by my gun-bearer from the fast clutches of the "wait a bit," and often with immense pains I succeeded in tracing the lions to the river after they had seized a victim, only to lose the trail from there onwards, owing to the rocky nature of the ground which they seemed to be careful to choose in retreating to their den. At this early stage of the struggle, I am glad to say, the lions were not always successful in their efforts to capture a human being for their nightly meal, and one or two amusing incidents occurred to relieve the tension from which our nerves were beginning to suffer. On one occasion, an enterprising Buna, an Indian trader, was riding along on his donkey late one night, when suddenly a lion sprang out on him, knocking over both man and beast. The donkey was badly wounded, and the lion was just about to seize the trader, when in some way or other his claws became entangled in a rope by which 2 empty oil tins were strung across the donkey's back. The rattle and clatter made by these as he dragged them after him gave him such a fright that he turned tail and bolted off into the jungle, to the intense relief of the terrified Buna, who quickly made his way up the nearest tree and remained there, shivering with fear, for the rest of the night. Shortly after this episode, a Greek contractor named Themistocles Papadimitriani had an equally marvelous escape. He was sleeping peacefully in his tent one night when a lion broke in, and seized and made off with the mattress on which he was lying. Though rudely awakened, the Greek was quite unhurt, and suffered from nothing worse than a bad fright. This same man, however, met with a melancholy fate not long afterwards. He had been to the Kilimanjaro district to buy cattle, and on the return journey attempted to take a short cut across country to the railway, but perished miserably of thirst on the way. On another occasion, 14 coolies who slept together in a large tent were one night awakened by a lion suddenly jumping on the tent and breaking through it. The brute landed with one claw on a coolie's shoulder, which was badly torn, but instead of seizing the man himself, in his hurry he grabbed a large bag of rice which happened to be lying in the tent, and made off with it, dropping it in disgust some little distance away when he realized his mistake. These, however, were only the early efforts of the man-eaters. Later on, as will be seen, nothing flurried or frightened them in the least, and except as food they showed a complete contempt for human beings. Having once marked down a victim, they would allow nothing to deter them from securing him, whether he was protected by a thick fence or inside a closed tent, or sitting around a brightly burning fire. Shots, shouting, and firebrands they alike held in derision.